and I'm welcoming each and every one of you here to the Aquarian Minyan's Yeshiva, our 12 noon Pacific time adult programming extravaganza. And this is a really important day for us. It's part two of what we hope to be a multi-part series called Roots of Renewal. We did the first part quite some time ago last year. We did a wonderful hour-long interview with Rabbi Bert Jacobson. And today we're so honored to have Barry Barkan with us. And this is going to be a kind of a wide-ranging interview, and the title Roots of Renewal is supposed to let you know that this is about people, interviewing people and being in touch with them who were part of the Jewish Renewal movement from Maseh Bereshis, basically from the beginning, in the beginning. So that's the roots, and then they're the branches, they're the fruits, they're all of these fun analogies. We will get to everyone eventually, but it's just, we're very rooty right now. So this week we have Barry Barkan, our wonderful Baal Bracha, and next week Reuven and Yehudit Goldfarb. The week after that, Lenny Trupin, Aryeh Trupin will be joining us, and we have lots of plans to interview all sorts of people who were there at the beginning to give us, who are in this neo-Hasidic Jewish Renewal science project called the Aquarian Minyan, and people who are joining us from outside the Minyan, a little taste, a little bissel of what it was like back in the day, and like really kind of what I really am hoping from this, I'll just say, and then I'll be quiet and let everybody else talk, especially Barry, is a taste, of like what that original spark was. Lots of times when we get together with you, and because you see it in action, that spark, when we get together and we come alive and the ideas are flowing and the magic is happening. I want to know where that came from. I want to feel the thing that, like, when you put these elements together, then poof, it happens. So Barry is very connected to that feeling, those elements, because if you've ever been in any kind of a service, a Shabbat service or a High Holy Day service or any kind of a thing with Barry, he is like a channel for the divine in so many ways. That's so wonderful. And we're just very, very lucky to have him with us today. So Barry, welcome everybody. I'm just going to ask everyone to please keep their microphones on mute unless you're actually talking. And Jonathan Seidel, Rabbi Jonathan Seidel, and our dear Dan Howard are going to be giving some questions over for you to answer in sort of free-form way. I'm sure other people will have questions for you as well. It's an interview style in that it's a dialogue, but we're really here to hear what you have to say and listen to you. So welcome everybody. Hope that sort of sets the table for what to expect today. Welcome, Barry.
Thank you, Lorelai. You said an elegant table.
Baruch Hashem. Jonathan is talking on the phone. I can't tell. Oh, he's talking to Dan. Okay. So this is part of the fun of the Aquarian Minyan is, we fly by the seat of our pants. That's where we fly. Our airport is in the seat of our pants. So we're going to overcome some of the technological challenges that Jonathan is having with the questions that he wants to ask you. I think he's probably giving them over to Dan right now. And we'll let them get on with their conversation. Welcoming Karen Rokart into the room, and Hannah Cohen and Ellie Malka and Renee Kramer. Look at all of you beautiful souls. Barry, is Debbie with you today?
No.
Okay, well, she can watch it later.
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right, Dan, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, I'm going to turn it over to you, my friend.
Okay, so I don't know if you just announced, so Rabbi Jonathan is he's in the city, San Francisco. He's having some trouble, connectivity issues, so he asked me to begin. So Barry, Reb Barry, a longtime Minyan member who we all revere and honor and learn from. Tell us a little bit about your background. We'll just leave it open. Tell us about your background.
Jewishly or in general?
Both.
So I went to Hebrew school 5 days a week when I was a kid and learned truancy and absorbed almost nothing. And it was very difficult. And then when I was 12, we moved to a Reform synagogue, and I was really taken by the spirit of justice in the Reform movement in those days, and the drive for justice. And I had some wonderful spiritual experiences. I didn't know there were spiritual experiences at the National Federation of Temple Youth conclaves that they had. And I actually was at the same synagogue as Rob in Long Island, Temple Emmanuel in New Hyde Park. I didn't know him then. He was a bit younger than I was. And when I was 15, the rabbi said to me, you know, maybe you want to think about being a rabbi, and I'll sponsor you, and you won't have to worry about funding for it, because I'll make sure it's all available for you. And I came home and told my parents, and I had been doing terribly in school, and I had very few validations of myself. And I went home and told my parents, and my father laughed and said, "You could never be a rabbi." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "To be a rabbi, you have to have humility." And I had a chip on my shoulder that was as big as a plank. And he said, and then he proceeded to give me a wonderful working definition of humility, which is not being more than you are, nor being less than you are, but being really who you are at the moment. And so, and then my Jewish identity moved to the back burner. And I became engaged in the counterculture, the civil rights movement. I worked in the South for a Black newspaper, the Richmond, Virginia Afro-American newspaper, where I was not only a white reporter, but the only reporter. And it was a weekly newspaper. And didn't have much experience of anything Jewish until I was on an LSD trip in New York, and I met a wonderful couple, and they took me and my brother Alan home with them, and he proceeded to introduce me to the world of Jewishness. He introduced me to the Baal Shem Tov. He introduced me to Martin Buber, and I read one line that said, "For me, Hasidism was the restoration of the Buber, of the connection. Hasidism was the restoration of the connection," and this was Buber speaking. And I knew it was true from the moment I read that, but I couldn't find a Hasidic world I could relate to. And then some years later, I was on the road, not knowing where I was going, but heading west in my VW bus, and I ran into some Hasidim in Eureka Springs, Arkansas. In a moment when they were coming to town, I was leaving town, and these were some hippie Hasidim. And I didn't want to be proselytized. And I said to one of the guys, to the guy who appeared to be the leader of the bunch, who had a
Barry, you appear to be frozen. We can't hear you.
Is this any better?
Yes, I think you're back now.
Okay. So
What'd the leader tell you?
What?
You were on the outskirts of town and you saw some Hasidim leaving town as
In
you
a
went.
VW bus, they were coming into town. I was leaving town, and they said to me, "This was Eureka Springs, Arkansas," and the guy turned out to be Mayim Chaim David Hertzfeld from the House of Love and Prayer, and he said to me, brother, it's to remind me that there's always someone above my head. And then he said, when you come to San Francisco, come to the House of Love and Prayer, Reb Shlomo will be there. I didn't know really much about Reb Shlomo, and I didn't know anything about the House of Love and Prayer. And I said, I don't know if I'll ever be in San Francisco. But he said, no, you'll be here, you'll be there, and call when you get there. And 6 months later, I called from San Francisco. I was living in San Francisco. I woke up one morning, thought of the House of Love and Prayer, and I called, and he answered the phone, that very same guy, Reb David, and he said, he heard my voice, and he said, Eureka Springs, is that you? And I went to the House of Love and Prayer that night, and it was the night that Reb Shlomo, may his memory be for healing and the blessing, and his new bride came to San Francisco together as husband and wife for the first time. And it was an awesome experience. And I remember Reb Shlomo taught about holy chutzpah, and that struck a chord with me. And that night he said to me, are you going to come back tomorrow? And I had never done a whole Shabbos in my whole life. And I said, I don't know. Next morning I got up and went back to the House of Love and Prayer. And that night he invited me to come with him the next day to LA with him and Neila. And so I did that. But a very interesting thing occurred to me on Shabbat morning. Shlomo said, is there a Kohen? They were starting the Torah services. There Kohen in the house, and nobody answered. And Reb David, who was this was the second House of Love and Prayer, by the way. It's almost like Aryeh went out and I came in, and so Reb David said, no, there doesn't seem to be a Kohen. And Reb Shlomo said, I know there's a Kohen here. And then I heard my own voice say, because it was totally non-volitional, I'm a Kohen. And then I sang the brachas in a voice I had never heard myself have before. And so I became Shlomo's shofar whenever he came to San Francisco to the House of Love and Prayer. And one day I was with Donna Maines, who was a great early Shlomo chassid. And I had just driven Shlomo and her former husband, Steve Mames, to the airport. And Donna and I stopped at a park and we're sitting and we're talking. And I said, I really love Shlomo, but there's a part of me, that loves the psychedelic experience, that loves the counterculture, that loves the civil rights movement and the anti-war movement and all these movements. And I'd like to see someone else who can connect me with these. And she began thinking, and she said, well, maybe the bub of a Rebbe, he walks 6 inches off the ground, kind of like Satchitananda. And then she said, no, Reb Zalman Schachter, in those days he wasn't Shalomi yet. I went to a donut shop in Berkeley, where I went every morning for my morning fix when I was working nearby. And there was a sign that said, a handbill, it said, Zalman Schachter will be teaching on Kabbalah. And I went, and that was the only time I saw the sign. And I called Hillel House and they said, it's full. I said, I need to come anyway. And they said, okay. And so that was my doorway to Reb Zalman. And that was his first seminar, his first 7-day seminar. He did 2 seminars that year, from which the Aquarian Minyan grew. And that was his first 7-day seminar. Aryeh Trupin was there. I think he's the only one on the call who was there today. And he said that first night he did an open session for everyone, for the general public. And he said that night that the Rebbe doesn't teach and the Chassid doesn't learn, but that they learn together. And that struck me. And so he issued bakery numbers for people to come and hang with him, to spend 15 minutes in a what the Hasidim call, what the Rebbes call a yechidus, a intimate connection with him. And I went in for my yechidus, and I told him that was what I loved so much about what he said. And this is the only way I'll accept a teacher is if we're learning together. And I brought with me a Doctor Strange comic book. You'll love this, Max. I brought a Doctor Strange comic book because I said to him, there are many ways. I said, Kabbalah is everywhere. And there needs to be a lateral transmission, as well as a from the tradition down, but that we're learning it in so many places, and that this is an example of it, and this is the only way I can move in to
Maybe Barry needs to move to another spot in his house.
Yeah, Barry, we're having some. Your image is frozen and there's no audio. Okay. So maybe if you could rewind a bit from your story. Okay, so we're going to get a better spot in the house, God willing. Any comments in the meantime? Well, here's Barry back.
Is this better?
Yes.
Okay.
So maybe back up your story a little bit and continue.
We're how far back? What was the last thing I heard? I had this wonderful yechidus with Reb Zalman.
That's
Lateral.
That I guess it was my holy chutzpah that caused me to say that on the deepest level, the deepest spiritual level, my experience may have prepared me as much as being in yeshiva would have prepared me. And he accepted that. And we became warm friends. And by the end of that week, he and Alana had moved into my apartment on Derby Street, which is about 4 blocks from where I am now. And we became very, very close after that. So that's my entry into the world of Jewish Renewal.
So tell us more about the birth of the Aquarian Minyan and your experience.
Are you frozen?
It's an interesting thing. I had a conversation with Roger Kamenetz, who had been working on a book with Reb Zalman that didn't come to fruit for a variety of reasons. But at that point, he was working on the book, and he called me and he interviewed me. And he read me what he'd written from what Reb Zalman said about the birth of the Aquarian Minyan. And he said that Reb Zalman said that yechidus I had with him was the birth of the moment the Aquarian Minyan was born. In that desire to have both a Rebbe and a relationship and a peer relationship with the Rebbe. He said that was the essence of the moment of the birth of the Aquarian Minyan. Now, I only have that secondhand, okay, but that was a very interesting thing. The first week, Zalman said to me, I want you to tell a story on Shabbat during that first week-long seminar. And so I looked up a Hasidic story. I looked through a number of Hasidic stories, and I told a story, and I don't even remember what it was at this point. And afterwards, Zalman took his shtreimel off, his vegetarian shtreimel, and he put it on my head. And I
What's a
held it.
vegetarian shtreimel?
It was not fur. It was not fur. It was a fake fur shtreimel. A shtreimel is a Hasidic hat. Years later, Jeff Roth and Max and I and Reb Zalman gathered in Woodstock, New York, to hang out for a week. And then afterwards, Max wasn't feeling well, but Jeff and Reb Zalman and I went to the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York, where the Dalai Lama was receiving an award. And unbeknownst to us, there were like people lined up around the block in the procession, and they were all dressed in religious garb. And Reb Zalman had a real shtreimel that I think he abandoned in his later years because he gave up the fur. But we all marched in processional. And so Reb Zalman back in the earlier moment took his shtreimel off and put it on my head, and I held it for a moment, and then I took it off and placed it on Barry Ring's head, and he placed it on Menucha Gleich's head, and Menucha placed it on maybe Yehudit's head. And it went around. I think that was another birth moment of the Aquarian Minyan, of our egalitarian spirit. And Reb Zalman came back and taught for another month. And during that month, what he did was he wove together all the traditions, and I think fulfilled a need that we have as Aquarian age Jews to live in all traditions. He would talk about how Kadosh 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 appeared in the missal, in the Catholic missal, and how it then appeared in Hindu prayer, and in Buddhist, he gave a Buddhist rendition of that. And he kept talking about how everything was everything, and everything is everything, and yet we're Jewish, and yet we're Jewish. And so, and in that teaching, he was so amazing in his ability to bring everything together with our Jewish calendar, with Shabbat, with the moments of our lives. And I don't know, ask me questions. It's easier that way. And nigunim.
Looks like Jennifer has a question.
Yeah, it's just a general question. You talked about Aquarian age Jews, like to what?
I'm sorry, Jennifer.
Couldn't hear you, Jennifer. Can't hear you.
You broke up.
Okay, I'm back. To what degree do you think, as a Jew, you are defined by your generation? Or do you feel like there's something that kind of transcends the generations? Or I don't know if that's the right kind of question to ask, but that's what I'm curious about.
That's a great question. It is really an important question. I think all of us alive today are part of one generation. And that we're a generation that's at the moment of the shift in the paradigm. We're at the moment of the paradigm shift. You know, when Reb Zalman came, it was when we were waking up to the paradigm shift, when he came to Berkeley. And so there was a book called The Aquarian Conspiracy. I don't know if anybody here remembers that book. You know, but it tied together all the current thinking about how the paradigm was shifting at the moment. The Tao of physics was talking about how the paradigm was shifting in the world of physics. And Reb Zalman kept teaching about the paradigm shift. In fact, he wrote a book called The Paradigm Shift, about how we're moving from the Piscean age to the Aquarian age. I think you may have heard about that, Lorelei. And so this is really important because Reb Zalman was like an avatar in this way. And all of us are now destined to have to fulfill this vision in our time. I remember when we were naming the Aquarian Minyan, and I had a conversation with Reb Zalman. And I said to him, I'm not sure exactly what to call our minyan. And Zalman said, whatever you call it, it needs to be connected to the Aquarian age. I said, the Aquarian Minyan. And so this is so important because now at this moment in history, when the seas are rising, when the planet is, when the environment is shifting, when the cry for justice is so strong in the world, and it's never been on so many tongues, the call for freedom on so many tongues as it is today, on so many tongues and so many languages, and in gender ways, and in all the ways in which people are saying, yes, we need inclusion, we need justice. And when the earth itself is crying out for us to get it together, we need to evolve as a species. We need to evolve as a species. We need to evolve as a human species. And it's this generation of us that's going to determine for ourselves and for the future whether or not we're going to come together now, or whether we're going to dissipate into some dystopian vision of the future. And so that's on that level of generation that I'm responding. On another level of generation is on the level of, yes, it's the older generation of us. There's the older generation of us who are in relationship to the younger generations. And this intergenerational dialogue needs to be stronger now than it ever has. We need to learn from each other. We need to be with each other. You know, I had a teacher at Goddard College. He was the first non-Westerner to teach non-Western studies in the United States institution of higher learning. Before that, it was all done by Westerners who went there and brought it back. And he said, education is conversation between generations. And so, you know, Zalman took up the flag of eldering, and I think it's very important that we work on becoming elders, but it's not in, but but what it does is it puts the whole generational flow into a context, because it gives us the crown jewel of human existence now, is in everything now folds into that role of elder. And so thank you for that question. It's a brilliant question, very important, inspired. Ellie Malcolm, my sister.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Reb Barry. The Minyan is the only place where I've heard people address one another as holy brother and holy sister. So how did that start? Because I've been to other congregations and it doesn't happen. So that's as far as I'll go.
Well, I think it goes back to Reb Shlomo. May his memory continue to be a healing and promote a healing in our lives. All aspects of his memory be for healing. So he called everybody holy brother and holy sister. So I first heard it in the House of Love and Prayer in San Francisco, in the second house, and it found a home in the Aquarian Minyan.
Thank you.
Holy sister.
Barry, take us back to those very, very early days of the Minyan, where you had Shabbat together, and the very first Shabbat with the Minyan, let's say, with Reb Zalman, and then what I'm even more curious about is without Reb Zalman, just amongst yourselves.
So with Reb Zalman, everything in his weekly teaching led to Shabbat. So I remember during the first week of the second teaching he did, he was teaching about talking to God. My friends, I need to go to the restroom very quickly. I'll be right back. Excuse me, please.
Taking time. Ay 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 ay, 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 ay. Ay, 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 la, 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 la. Ay, 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 la, la,
Let's
la,
welcome
la.
Ruth.
Ay, la, 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 la. Ay, 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 ay. Ay, 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 Aquarian Minyan, Aquarian Minyan, lives forever, lives forever.
Now, I first heard that niggin. It's from the 18th century, and it's called the Baal Bracha Nigun. Right, Jonathan? Yeah.
So Reb Zalman was teaching about prayer. And he was teaching about finding your voice in prayer. And it had deep significance for me because and he also taught about shuckling, that we shuckle when we pray. Shuckling is very important. Shuckling is like Jewish zikr. Can you all move back and forth a little bit with me? Shuckling when you pray. You do it like this, a little bit like this. Comes Sufi. So a very exciting thing happened that night. The Thursday night became very important in the life of the early Minyan, because that's when we organize ourselves for Shabbat. And every Thursday night we would have a meeting, and we would plan Shabbat on that Thursday night. And Shabbat in those days was Friday night. And I still, would love to see us do that sometimes. Take one Friday night, one Thursday night in which maybe Hannah Cohen can lead us in planning Shabbat, since she's the Baal of Friday night. And so this particular Thursday night, we had been learning all week about finding our voice and practicing finding our voice. And finally, Zalman said, look, Thursday night, he said, look, tonight we have to really find our voices so we can really dive in with our own voice tomorrow night for Friday night. And so we all went to different places in the room, and we're kind of looking for our voice. And then all of a sudden I heard this voice ring out from the balcony of the old Hillel house. Shema Yisrael. And everybody harmonized themselves to that voice. And it turned out to be Debbie's voice. And that was my first experience of Debbie, was to hear her voice singing Shema Yisrael like that. It was amazing. So the first Friday night after Zalman, after our first Friday night together, there was a guy involved in the Minyan in the early names. His name was Barry Ring. He was known as Little Barry, and I was Big Barry because I was much bigger in my girth than he was in those days. And he was very learned. He was a devoted chassid of the Alexander Rebbe. And so at our Thursday night meeting, I asked Barry if he would lead the services, and he said, "No, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to lead the first service." So fools rush in where heroes fear to tread. And so I said, "Okay, I'll lead the service." And so I remember the order of the service that Zalman taught. The order of the service was basically the order of Marav, of Shacharis, was basically that you're praising God's name and creating an opening for God to come into your being, that you're then going into the revelatory time. The Shema is the moment of revelation. And that we then go into the Amida, which is the time of redemption, praying for the redemption. And so I led a service. And then the next week, Barry Ring led a service. And then the next week, Menucha stepped up. Now for Menucha, this was a very big deal because Menucha grew up in Crown Heights. And in fact, Zalman had dinner at her table, at her father's table, when they were looking for shidduch for her sister, for her older sister. And so for Menucha to lead a service, it was like an awesome experience for her. It was like really breaking out. And then the next week, Yehudi led a service. And then the next week, Sue Goldberg led the service. And there was a lot of Hare Krishnaing and a lot of other kinds and a lot of English. I would like more English in our services today. There was a lot of English, so that it became more accessible to everyone. And gradually over time, it became more focused on And at the same time, thank God we're more open
More
still
focused on
today.
what? We missed the word.
More focused on a transformative experience. It needs to be a transformative experience. Davening needs to be transformative. If it's not of itself renewing, it's stale. And so it needs to be focused on transformation. It needs to be focused on bringing down holiness and bringing up holiness and connecting it all in one holy circle, in one holy cycle of beingness that's going upwards, always downwards, always in circle. Another question, perhaps?
Karen.
Are you asking me if I have a question?
Oh, I thought I see a hand raised there, but
No,
that's
no,
not.
those are Barry's hands actually in the picture.
Okay. Anyone with a question?
Ellie has a question.
Ellie,
Well, I already asked. Thank you. Holy.
Abigail? Okay.
can I tell
Okay.
a story of Abby? Do you have a question, my sister? My beloved sister, my friend Abigail, I love you so much, my sister. I bless you with good health, great health, long life, productivity, meaning, and new
Amen.
frontiers in your life.
Amen.
Amen, amen.
I have a question, Barry.
Yes.
So this is 5781, the year, otherwise known as 2021. And you were talking about being that we're all in this generation of the paradigm shift, right? But things aren't just static. This is a living, growing organism, right? The Aquarian Minyan is living, growing. It's almost 47 years old. So we've been talking about the roots, the feeling, the spirit, the initiative, this like great, you all stepped into this great living wellspring of Kedusha, holiness, the river of spirit, and put down roots there. And now time has passed. We're in this other part of the same general time period of this awakening. What do you think is the most important way to focus the lens of where we are right now in the Aquarian Minyan, because we're at a different point than we were 47 years ago. There's all these other factors, but yet there's the same essential thing that we need and that we want and that we hope that we are bringing forward and sparking. Can you speak to that a little bit?
After a long hiatus, I started davening every day again. And I began, I'm very much thinking about how it is now. I'll tell you a story. Reb Zalman was beginning a negotiation with me. And he said to me, "New Barry Laban, what's the least you would be willing to do in order to be a rabbi?" And I said to him, "Well, Zalman, there are two reasons why I wouldn't want to do the least I could do in order to be a rabbi." He said, "So what are they?" And I said, "Well, first, I would not want to embarrass my teachers by not being all that I could be." And he said, "Good." And he thought he was reeling me in. And then I said, "But the second reason is that I believe that my work in the world, I believe that Jewish survival, in fact, is going to be dependent on our ability to take the essence of Judaism into the world." And this has been what a lot of my work has been. It's been all of my work in my life has been about that. even before I knew it. And so I received an email from a neighbor who lives both in her native Germany and up the street from me in Berkeley. And she said to me that her mother married a Jew and converted, and she had a mezuzah, and she passed away. And how would I feel about her putting the mezuzah on her door, hanging the mezuzah on her door? And I thought about it, and I wrote back to her and I said, you know, I think if you want to express solidarity with the Jewish people and you understand what the essence of it is, and that really what we're doing when we come into our house and go out of our house is acknowledging we're going from one holy place to another, then it's a good idea. And the more I think about it, I think that what we need to do now is to take the essence of our Jewishness, the essence of our Jewish practice, without demanding people become Jewish, into the world. And so I even have been thinking about tefillin, and maybe teaching tefillin not to Jews, but to non-Jews. Because there's nothing in it that says you have to be Jewish to lay tefillin, to put on tefillin. You know, part of my mission has been to teach tefillin to women, to put tefillin on women. Now I want to put it on a transgender male, you know, as part of that tradition. You know, the Shabbat, the world so desperately needs a holy day of Shabbat in which we become whole. And this is in addition to Friday for Muslims and for Sunday for Christians. And the world economy will do better, and the earth will do better if we have 3 days off a week. So all of that will work. You know, so I think that's very important now. And not only that, but the practice of rebbitude, this whole thing, I really got it. I really got it that we all need to be rebbes, that we all need to be rebbes. You know, what I'm getting at now is that it involves a lot of practice as being a rebbe, a lot of practice, of waking up, to our mortality, of dedicating our lives to service, of being engaged in the struggle for human rights and human dignity, of practicing to curb our inner beast, to understand, to learn the anger that undermines all our hurt, or the hurt that stands beneath all of our anger. That all of these things are things that we need to do right now. And that this is the essence of what it is I learned, of what the living tradition is about today. And we need to take it to the world. I would like to invent from scratch, you know, from the whole kahal, you know, to invent a Sunday morning service, a Sunday morning universal service, in which we're taking our Jewish practice, reformulating it in a way that's universal, and creating this as a way of getting together on Sunday mornings as a universal Aquarian Minyan that's not necessarily Jewish, but is Jewish in the heart of our beingness. It's now time for us to survive as a people, to take our beingness to the world, our essence, and to give it over freely and lovingly, and without trying to convert anyone to Judaism, but to give it over in that way. So I don't know if that answers you, but I don't know how much time is left.
We have at least 10 minutes or more. We can go beyond 1 o'clock if you wish.
So I would like to talk about Chabad. And I would like to talk about the Chabad tradition. You know, I remember going to Chabad Reb Zalman was pretty much of an outcast in Chabad. You know, it's hard to say what was the final thing. You know, when he was in Massachusetts, he was a Hebrew school teacher, principal. He also was a shochet, a ritual slaughterer. So a little story is that one time he worked in the slaughterhouse, and the energy was so unholy. You know, the guys there, would they come in, and the guys who worked there, they talk about their conquests, their sexual conquests, and all that kind of stuff. And Zalman wanted to raise up the level of energy, and he started singing spirituals. Joshua fought the battle of Jericho, Jericho, Jericho. Joshua fought the battle of Jericho, and then they all started chiming in with him. Michael, row your boat ashore, and the energy got lifted up. And so back in that time of his life, he then went for a master's degree in divinity at Harvard Divinity, not Harvard, at Boston College. And
Boston University.
Boston University. That's right. And the dean of the divinity school was Howard Thurman. And he was very sensitive to Reb Zalman, and he covered up the cross in the chapel. And he taught Zalman how to daven in ways other than Jewish. And at this time, he heard about Doctors Leary and Alpert, who then, of course, became Ramdas. And he approached Leary and he said to him, "I'll teach you Kabbalah if you teach me LSD." And so he took Zalman on a trip. And Zalman thought that he had an experience of that which the Baal Shem could access. And he wrote a paper called The Conscious Ascent of the Soul, thinking that this would be so welcome in Chabad. And at that point, he was sort of exiled to Winnipeg. But Zalman was a Chabadnik until the end, you know, and so his first teaching in Berkeley was of Tanya, you know, of the book by the Alter Rebbe, and one of the big teachings that he taught in that first Tanya class, which he taught as Kabbalah, and he taught the Sefirot through that, was the notion of the Benoni, and the Benoni is the in-between. It's in between being the perfect tzaddik and the absolute sinner, is that point in the middle. And I figure I can never be a tzaddik, but I can possibly aim for the Benoni point. And this was very important in Zalman's teaching, was that point. But he was pretty much exiled from Chabad. And I remember his visiting here, and it was Tisha B'Av, and he wanted to daven, and we went to Chabad. It was like his first time to a Chabad house in many, many years. It was like the outskirt. Berkeley was the outskirt of Chabad, and he went there, and I remember Rabbi Hanan Feld, who was the great Moel at the time. He should rest in peace. He posed a question to Reb Zalman about steadying his hand. And Reb Zalman told him about giving it over to God. He said, that's the answer I was needing at that moment. And I remember him telling that story again and again as time went on. And I remember going to Chabad house in Denver and Boulder with Chabad, with Reb Zalman. And Reb Zalman drove to Chabad house on Shabbat. It was not within walking distance. And he brought candy in his pocket for the young children to sweeten their connection with him. And interestingly now, the thing that's happening in Chabad is that it's expanding to move over more towards where he was. You know, it's no longer that you have the Chabad rabbi going out, it's the Chabad rabbi and rebbetzin going out to the community. And in equal status. And it's now, and then now is a kind of a recognition among Chabad rabbis of the other, of the importance of honoring the others and their traditions. And so Reb Zalman was a Chabadnik. I feel like the Aquarian Minyan in our own way is part and parcel of the Chabad tradition. Just as we're part and parcel of the Baal Shem's tradition. And so this is our Chabad legacy, and it's very important that we remember and honor our Chabad legacy as we take it to places that no one has gone before. And this is what we need to do in our generations, to take it to places. And it's also the legacy of the Baal Shem and Rebbe Nachman and all the holy mothers that were so profound and not recognized in the past, that we now need to, that we're now calling up, we're now seeing. And you know, it's an interesting thing, Kehila, which came from the Minyan, you know, Rabbi Bert was in the Minyan when he started Kehila. I remember him telling me that it's an interesting phenomenon that there are among the LGBT people in Kehila, that they're the biggest advocates of more traditional davening in the Kehila. And so it's all a beautiful mishmash of hallelujahs, a mishmash of hallelujah. And so Reb Zalman did his first Shabbat under the sponsorship of the first high holidays under the sponsorship of the Aquarian Minyan. And it was held at Glide Memorial Church. For those of you who don't know about it, Glide Memorial is in the middle of the Tenderloin, a very radical, profoundly radical Christian church. Cecil Williams was the minister there at the time. His wife is now, and Cecil gave the Yom Kippur sermon, and Yom Kippur Day, a Sufi sheikh came and did zikr, and the Sufi choir sang, was the choir for those services. And so from the start, we have been a multicultural Judaism, and as the Jewish people are becoming more multiracial now than we were before. Karen, you have a hand up?
I do. I have a question, which is, how do we keep, all the traditions like the Hasidism, second generation, third, they all got very narrow and same and not open. Do you have any thoughts at all on the concept of how to keep renewal open to alternatives such as that, as opposed to getting stultified in this is how we do it, boom?
Well, we have to become very careful with our services. Our services have to become both traditional and laboratories. They have to become laboratories for making the future, for making space for other things to enter into them.
Any thoughts on how you do that at this point? And with Zoom and stuff
How we do that?
now and while we're on Zoom and
Well, I think
I
that
can think of one example, Barry, just what we've done. I mean, not what we've done. Len Fellman has been experimenting with Rebbe Nachman niggins for months now. Like it's been a laboratory and a science project, and he's been bringing forward something that we've never really, that I know of, had as part of our liturgy. And I've watched this evolve as a living science project that's so, I think, enriching. Just throwing it out there as a current example, but I'm interested in hearing what you have to say.
well, I think Reb Ami has been wonderful in that regard as well. And Reb Jonathan, a blessing of the life of this community. In fact, Reb Jonathan and Reb Lorelei, my holy brother and sister, are really our heirs to carry this into the next phase of our beingness. The torch has been passed to a new generation of rebbes and managers, rebbe managers, manager rebbes, and so forth. And Reb Jonathan does a pretty good job of keeping it open. And I encourage you, Reb Jonathan, to do that more in the future, to keep our services open. And and I think that we need to figure out how to carry this into the world, how to carry it more into the world. This is what I'm working on now with my manifesto. I'm writing a manifesto, which is my expression of how we keep carry this, of how we save the world right now. The world needs saving. How we rescue the world from humanity. And it's not that humanity is evil, it's that we took seriously the blessing to be fruitful and multiply, and we've multiplied and we've multiplied and we've multiplied. And now we need to come into the order. We need to bring it all into order. We need to evolve as a human species. And so this is what my manifesto, which is about, which I'm working on. And it's going to be short. Hopefully, will be illustrated and pretty. And I love the idea of creating a Sunday morning service from the Kahal.
I think we can help you with that.
That's
Yeah.
And I know you can, Reb Jonathan. You're amazing, Reb Jonathan, in all the worlds you touch, in all the ways in which you bring all kinds of music and spiritual tradition and lineage and hope. And this was Reb Zalman's legacy, to do it that way. And so I want to bless you and empower you to do it more, Reb Jonathan.
Thank you.
To do it more.
Back at you, bro. Back at everybody. Pass it around, brothers and sisters.
Hey, that's
Pass
right.
it around.
Got to be a
Pass it around.
event. I want to say one more word about the word lay leadership. I really would like to strike that word from our vocabulary. We are not the lay leadership, we're the communal leadership. We're the communal leadership in which each of us is a vessel to the the Holy Blessed One. And we have in our community a rabbi, a visiting rabbi. We have other rabbis in our community. We have others in our community like Karen Rokard and Ami and others who I'll put their learning against any rabbi who have not had smicha, and so we're not the lay leadership in the community. We are the communal spiritual leadership, and we have a visiting rabbi who I think is getting closer and closer to being a rabbi chaver, to reaching that level of leadership that Reb David brought us. And I can't speak enough about Reb David as a holy teacher in our community who also came from the Chabad tradition.
Mhm.
And you know, I daven with his with his book, because I daven in my mama lashon, which is not Yiddish but English. And I daven with Reb Zalman, has a siddur in English, you know, for daily prayer. Reb David has his meta siddur, and so I just wanted to end with something from Reb David's meta siddur. So there's this prayer that says, "Thank you, God, for putting the soul in me. The soul which was fashioned in the world of Atzilut," is ways on where David puts it. And so I meditate on this each day, that my soul, what does it mean? My soul was fashioned in the world which is pure God, and comes from that place, and came down to the world of Bria, in which it began to take on identity, in which it began to be given my deployment. Now, deployment is a very important concept. You know, I heard it for the first time from Reb Zalman when he said, "Barry Laban, I'm not going to be traveling anymore. Even I decided not to travel anymore. I've done enough traveling." And then 6 months later, he called in, he said, "Barry Laban, Eve and I are going to Australia and to New Zealand." And I said, "Reb Zalman, I thought that you weren't traveling anymore." He said, "Well, I feel like I'm being deployed there." And then I read the wonderful biography of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, which I recommend completely, called The Rebbe by Telushkin. And in it, the Rebbe talked about deployment. It's a Chabad thing, being deployed. And I think our souls are deployed in the world of Bria, where they take on our identity, our deployment. And then in the world, and this is what I get from Reb David's prayer book. And then in the world of Yetzirah, the world of formation, it integrates the epigenetic makeup that each of us has, our own epigenetics, you know, which comes like this to each of us through the tradition. It comes from Abraham and Sarah on down to each of us through our own lineage in the tradition, each one taking on the experience of our lifetime, the learning of our lifetime. That's what epigenetics is about, the combination of genetics and the experiential beingness that we have. And so in the world of Yetzirah, my soul integrates my epigenetic makeup with the 10 Sephirot, with the tree of life. And these come together as I'm birthed in the world, as my soul is birthed in the world of Asiya through my mother and my father. And I thank God for my soul, which someday will depart from this body. I only have it for a period of time, and then it will leave me. And we never know. Reb David didn't know when he wrote that his soul would depart sooner than he should have, from our point of view, but at the right moment, perhaps from his soul's point of view. And then it will return. It will return to the world of Asiya in a form that I may know and I may not know, and then come down once again, perhaps, into another world of Bria, where it will be assigned and go on and on and on. And so this is part of Jewish Renewal, is being able to look at at the teachers that we've had and what we can learn from them. I mean, there's been nobody in the history of the Jewish people who's interpreted Torah and davening the way Rev David Wolf Blank, our Rebbe Chavera, did it so beautifully, so magnificently. And so Reb Jonathan, you're pretty close to being a Rabbi Chaver, brother. I don't know if you want to accept that as part of your beingness, but I give it to you right now. If you'll take it, I'll give it to you. And I'll ask,
Nikabel alai. Ol
What?
malchut shamayim. The rabbanut shel chaver. Ani mekabel
the
alai.
Rabbanut
Sure,
Shel
I accept
Chaver.
it.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm still trying to figure it
And
out.
so maybe when the personnel committee meets to go over your contract, we should change the language to submit to the council from visiting rabbi to visiting Rabbi Chaver. You know, because you're not here all the time.
Kol
And we're all
chavirim
chaverim.
arevim
We're-
ze
and
baze.
we're all
friends
sparks.
are linked
We're
together. Yes.
all containers for the sparks of the divine. Wherever we
Amen.
are, Max, my brother and teacher, I see you there, Max. You know, you're a great spark of the divine. You know, Max has just written an autobiography called Just Was. And I urge everyone to get it from Amazon. And hopefully, Max, this will be presented in one of our Minyan book nights, you know, in which you'll come and read from your autobiography, you know, which is very Hindu Jewish. I'm a Jufi. I'm a Sufi.
Where did you put it?
I'm a Hindu. You know, we're all of these things. I'm a Black Lives Matters Jew. I'm an Earth Jew. You know, and this is the new Hasidim. And this is the new
have one-
Hasidim.
One comment on one of your thoughts, Barry, which is that on Sunday morning, we would be entering into a holy space of the Christians and must be very aware of that.
Honoring of them, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I vote for
Absolutely.
Seudah Shlishit.
Saludish.
Third
Ah.
meal on Shabbos, Seudah Shlishit. That's what I vote for.
So Barry, I have a question. It's short, and it's easy, and it's hard. So if you had to distill your experience of the Aquarian Minyan down to 3 words, what would they be?
I prefer not to do 3 words. Okay, I prefer to do a sentence. Connect with the divine, with the Holy Blessed One. Learn to love yourself and seek forgiveness and do teshuvah in a loving way for yourself, so that you can then love your neighbor as yourself in a pure way. Seek the divine, the Holy Blessed One. Align ourselves. Okay, so we're a community in which we align ourselves with the Holy Blessed One. Learn to love ourselves. Forgive ourselves. Forgive others. So that we can then love our neighbor as ourselves and bring that into the world and bring healing to the world. 3 words.
Beautiful.
Yeah, Barry, thank you. An
Beautiful.
astounding, profound, wonderful
What a great hour. Thank
for
you
the
so much.
generations. So I'll turn this back over to Lorelei. Thank you, Barry.
Amen, amen.
Thank you so much, Barry. Wow. So amazing. It's such a blessing to have you with us. Ad Mea V'Esrim, you should be with us till at least till 120 minimum.
Amen.
Amen.
I'm going to turn off the cloud